The Royal Moon Arena held 10,000 wolves that night. Torches burned in long silver columns along the ceremonial walls. The moon crystal glowed overhead, enormous and sacred, suspended between two ancient stone pillars like a second moon pulled down from the sky. The centennial moon ceremony only happened once every 100 years. Everyone who lived to witness it considered themselves fortunate. Nobody expected what was about to happen. Ashley Stevens stood alone in the center of the arena floor. Her chestnut-brown hair fell in soft waves past her shoulders, damp at the edges from the cold night air. She wore a silver-white gown with crystal embroidery that caught the moonlight and scattered it in tiny points across the stone floor around her. A small moon-shaped pendant rested at the base of her throat. Her hazel eyes stayed forward. She had practiced keeping them forward for weeks, ever since the moon goddess confirmed what she had quietly suspected for 2 years. She and Alpha King Andrew McLean were fated mates. Andrew stood on the ceremonial platform above her. 6 feet 2 inches of golden blonde authority, dressed in a black royal uniform trimmed with silver wolf insignia. His crown caught the light and threw it back at the crowd. He was every inch the king this kingdom had been raised to admire. Broad-shouldered, composed, ice-blue eyes that gave nothing away. Even now, standing above the woman fate had chosen for him, his face was completely still. Ashley had told herself he was nervous, that the stillness meant something private was moving beneath it. She was wrong. Andrew McLean raised his right hand, palm flat toward her. The ancient rejection gesture. Every wolf in the arena recognized it immediately. The musicians stopped mid-note. Somewhere in the back rows, a woman drew a sharp breath. A senior advisor named Deborah, standing near the royal dais in an impeccably tailored burgundy coat, lowered her chin to hide her smile. I, Andrew McLean, Alpha King of the Northern Wolf Kingdom, reject you, Ashley Stevens, as my fated mate. The words moved through the arena like a cold current through still water. 10,000 wolves heard them. 10,000 wolves watched. Ashley did not move. Her fingers found the moon pendant at her throat and pressed against it once. The way someone presses a bruise just to confirm the pain is real. It was real. Andrew continued, his voice carrying without effort through the cathedral-sized space, calm and controlled and utterly without apology. The moon goddess honors tradition, but this kingdom's future requires more than tradition. It requires strength, alliance, and legacy. Ashley Stevens carries none of these. The crowd stirred. Near the front, a noblewoman leaned toward her companion and whispered something behind a gloved hand. Her companion nodded. Others were already turning away from Ashley the way people turn from a spilled glass. Not unkind exactly, just finished with something messy. Only Nora, Ashley's best friend, remained completely still in the audience. Her jaw locked, her dark eyes blazing with a fury she barely kept inside her body. Ashley lifted her chin. She had not expected the rejection. She had expected this night to change her life in an entirely different way. But she had been raised by a woman who told her that dignity was the one thing no one could take unless you handed it to them first. She would not hand it over tonight. Andrew descended the platform steps slowly, the way men who have never been questioned move, unhurried, certain, already thinking about the next thing. He passed within 4 feet of Ashley without meeting her eyes. Then, just before he turned away completely, he glanced at her. For one fraction of a second, something crossed his face. Not regret. Worse than regret. Doubt. Arriving too late to matter, already being buried under the rigid line of his jaw. He looked away. The rejection ritual was complete. The moon crystal above the arena flickered once, as though even the sacred stone was uncertain what to do with what had just happened. Ashley turned toward the exit. The crowd parted for her, not out of respect, but out of the particular discomfort people feel when they have witnessed something they cannot quite defend. She had made it halfway across the arena floor when the sound stopped her. A deep, low rumble rolled through the ground beneath her feet. Then the enormous iron gates at the western entrance of the Royal Moon Arena groaned open against the weight of the night wind. Every torch along the arena walls shuddered. Cold air pressed through the space, carrying something unfamiliar, the scent of cedar smoke and open territory, wild and unhurried. The crowd turned. Royal guards near the gate reached for their weapons, then stopped. A motorcade of black vehicles rolled into the arena grounds and stopped in a neat line. The lead door opened. He stepped out slowly, the way men move when they have never needed to rush to prove anything. Tall, broad through the shoulders. Thick black hair, slightly damp at the temples from the night air. A white ceremonial coat with silver embroidery that caught the arena light and gleamed like something ancient and deliberate. Deep brown eyes that swept the crowd once, without warmth, without hostility, simply measuring. A thin scar cut across his left eyebrow. Not a flaw, a history. He did not bow. Not to the arena. Not to the crowd. Not to the king standing rigid on the ceremonial platform above. Alpha Juan Lopez. The rival king. The one name Andrew McLean's advisors whispered with careful voices in closed rooms. The one Alpha who had never, in 15 years of border disputes and political negotiations, lowered himself an inch. He scanned the arena, and his gaze stopped. On Ashley, standing alone in the center of the floor, silver gown trembling at the hem, chin lifted, eyes dry. Juan Lopez looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked up at Andrew McLean on the platform. Something in his expression shifted. Not rage. Something quieter and far more dangerous than rage. He began walking, not toward the king, toward Ashley. Subscribe to see how this unfolds and comment where you're watching from. I will love to say hello to you, just to know how far our story is going. 3 hours before the arena gates opened, Ashley Stevens had stood in a small preparation room behind the ceremony hall and stared at herself in a mirror that was too honest. Her silver-white gown had been a gift from her late mother. The crystal embroidery had taken an elderly seamstress named Maria 3 weeks to complete by hand. Ashley had fastened the moon pendant at her throat, the one her mother pressed into her palm the night she passed, whispering that it had belonged to her grandmother, and to her grandmother before that. A line of women who had loved quietly and served faithfully and never asked the world to notice. Ashley had asked tonight, just once, just this one night, for the world to notice. Nora had appeared in the doorway, wearing a deep green dress and an expression of barely contained excitement. You look like the kind of woman kings write poetry about and then deeply regret losing, which is appropriate. Because tonight you are going to walk out there and become Luna of the Northern Kingdom, and I am going to cry so hard I embarrass both of us. Ashley had laughed. Real, warm, the kind of laugh that comes from knowing someone has your back so completely that even the terrifying things feel possible. Let's not celebrate before the ceremony, Nora. Let's not be superstitious before the ceremony, Ashley. The moon goddess confirmed it. The bond marks appeared. It's done. The bond marks had appeared on Ashley's left wrist 2 months ago. Faint silver lines in the shape of an interlocking moon and sun, the ancient sign of a fated pairing recognized by the Wolf Kingdom for generations. When they appeared, Ashley had sat down on the floor of her classroom. She taught children at a community school 3 days a week, and pressed her back against the wall and stayed there for a long time. She had loved Andrew McLean from a distance for years, quietly, without expectation. The way you love something you believe you were never meant to have. The bond marks changed the equation entirely. Now she stood in the arena and watched the equation get burned to the ground. The rejection was complete by the time she reached the middle of the floor on her way to the exit. The crowd noise had risen from stunned silence into a low, rolling murmur that crawled along the stone walls and found her from every direction. She caught fragments as she walked. A woman near the second row. A teacher from the outer settlements. Can you imagine? A man in royal colors. He made the right call. The kingdom needs alliances, not charity workers. Another voice, younger. She looked like she actually believed it would go the other way. That last one almost undid her, because she had believed it. Completely and entirely, she had stood under the moon crystal and believed that fate, having been so specific about everything else, would not have brought her this far to humiliate her in front of 10,000 people. She was almost at the gate when she heard the motorcade. The crowd's murmur died. The kind of silence that falls when something unexpected arrives and no one quite knows what shape it will take. Ashley stopped walking. She felt it before she saw him. A shift in the air, the way the arena's attention physically turned, like a weather change you sense before the clouds move. Juan Lopez came to a stop directly in front of her. Up close, he was different than the stories. The stories described him as brutal and cold and impossible to read. The man standing 6 feet away from Ashley had all the stillness of someone who had learned to be very, very careful with his energy. But his eyes, when they met hers, were not cold at all. They were careful and angry, and aimed somewhere above her head, at the platform where Andrew McLean stood watching with an expression that had, for the first time all evening, cracked slightly from its composed surface. Juan looked down at Ashley. "Are you all right?" Just those 4 words. Quiet enough that only the people immediately nearby could hear. Not performative. Not political. Ashley blinked. Of all the things she had been prepared to hear tonight, a rival king asking if she was all right was not one of them. "I'm walking out of here with my head up. So yes." Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. Something closer to recognition. He turned toward the platform. Toward Andrew. And he spoke loudly enough that the entire arena heard every word. "I arrived tonight to honor the centennial ceremony. I find instead that your king has used a sacred ritual to publicly shame a woman who did nothing to deserve it. I want the kingdom to remember that I witnessed this." The silence that followed was enormous. Andrew's ice-blue eyes moved from Juan to Ashley and back again. The muscle in his jaw tightened visibly from 30 feet away. Deborah, beside the royal dais, had stopped smiling. Richard, the senior royal advisor on Andrew's left, leaned close to the king and murmured something fast and quiet. Juan had already turned away from the platform. He looked at Ashley once more. "My cars are outside. You don't have to go with me, but you don't have to walk out of here alone either." Ashley looked at him for a long moment, looked at the arena around her, the faces, the torches, the moon crystal that had stopped flickering and now burned a steady, cold silver overhead. She thought of her mother's pendant at her throat. She thought of Nora somewhere in that crowd, probably vibrating with rage on her behalf. She thought of the children she taught 3 days a week, who told her every session that she was the reason they believed school mattered. Then she looked back at Juan Lopez, who was still waiting with the particular patience of a man who knew the answer might be no and had already decided to respect it. She nodded once. They walked out of the Royal Moon Arena together, and the iron gates closed behind them with a sound like a chapter ending. The black motorcade moved through the kingdom's walled roads at a measured speed. Not fleeing, not hurrying. Juan Lopez did not do anything that looked like retreat. Ashley sat beside him in the rear of the lead vehicle, her hands folded in her lap, her gown still catching light from the passing street lamps. Nora had managed to make it out of the arena in time to slip into a second vehicle. Ashley had seen her face through the tinted glass, equal parts fury and fierce relief. The silence inside the car was the comfortable kind. Ashley did not know why it was comfortable. She had expected tension, or the particular discomfort of being rescued by someone you don't know. Instead, the silence simply existed between them like a third person who was not bothering anyone. Juan spoke first. "You didn't cry." Ashley looked at him. "People handle pain differently. I know. I've seen both. Crying is not weakness. Holding your chin up when every instinct says fold. That's something else." Ashley was quiet for a moment. "He was always going to do it. I just didn't know it yet." Juan looked forward through the windshield. His jaw set at an angle that suggested he had thoughts about Andrew McLean he was currently choosing not to express. "You knew him?" "I loved him. For years. From the kind of distance that lets you build someone into something better than they actually are. Then fate gave me a sign, and I thought the sign was about him. Now I'm wondering if the sign was about me, about who I was becoming, not who I was becoming it with." Juan turned his head and looked at her then. Not the way men look at women they are trying to impress. The way you look at someone who just said something that surprised you into respect. "Where do you want to go?" Ashley considered. Her apartment was on the eastern edge of the kingdom. Small, warm, full of lesson plans and community reports and the organized mess of someone who spent most of their energy helping other people run their lives rather than decorating their own. Home. I need to sleep, and in the morning I need to figure out what comes next. That's reasonable. You're very calm for someone who just interrupted a royal ceremony and announced his presence to a king he has active border disputes with. Something genuinely close to humor moved across his face. I was already on my way here for the centennial. I simply arrived 5 minutes later than planned and found a reason to make my entrance count. Ashley looked at him sideways. You drove a motorcade into a sacred arena because you thought the timing was good. I drove a motorcade into a sacred arena because I watched the ceremony feed on the secure channel before entering, and I saw what Andrew McLean was about to do, and I decided the timing was very good. The car turned onto the long road toward the Eastern District. Outside the windows, the kingdom moved past in lamplight. Quiet streets, shuttered shops, the occasional wolf in late-night clothes glancing up at the motorcade with wide eyes. Ashley looked out her window. She told herself the warmth settling in her chest was just the relief of being out of the arena. She almost believed it. Nora, however, was not calm. The moment they arrived at Ashley's apartment building and the cars stopped, Nora emerged from the second vehicle like a woman who had been holding an argument inside her body for 45 minutes and had reached her absolute limit. I need everyone to understand that I am not okay. I am deeply, cosmically not okay. Andrew McLean rejected his fated mate in front of 10,000 people and then had the nerve to walk away like he had done something responsible. And I am standing here in a green dress having the worst night of my life on behalf of my best friend, and I don't even get to punch anyone because there are guards everywhere. Juan looked at her with the expression of a man encountering a force of nature he has no interest in arguing with. You must be Nora. Nora stopped. Ashley told you about me? She didn't have to. You're exactly as described. Nora looked at Ashley. I like him. I hate that I like him, but I like him. Juan arranged a small security presence near the building. Discreet, professional, nothing aggressive, and declined Ashley's offer of tea with a quiet politeness that suggested he understood the limits of the evening. He handed her a contact card with a single number on it. Not a request. Not an obligation. If you need anything, call. If you don't, that's equally fine. He left before she could overthink it. Ashley stood in her apartment that night in her mother's gown. Moon pendant around her neck, Nora sitting cross-legged on the kitchen counter eating crackers and delivering a quiet, comprehensive character assessment of Andrew McLean that required some creative vocabulary. Ashley listened and let herself feel it. All of it. The grief of a love that had been real, even if the object of it had not been what she believed. The humiliation that would still be in people's mouths at breakfast tomorrow. The strange, unexpected steadiness of a man who had driven a motorcade into a sacred ceremony simply because he thought something unjust was happening and decided to say so. She pressed her palm against the moon pendant. She was not finished. She was not broken. She was just beginning. The kingdom's morning news feeds ran with it by sunrise. Every major Wolf Territory channel had a version of the same headline. Alpha King issues historic rejection during centennial ceremony. Below it, the photographs told the rest of the story without needing words. Ashley standing alone under the moon crystal, her chin lifted, her face composed in that particular way that people who have been hit very hard sometimes look when they have decided not to give the hit the satisfaction of showing. Below that, a second set of photographs. Juan Lopez walking toward Ashley in the arena, the two of them leaving side by side, the iron gates closing behind them. The reactions split the kingdom cleanly down the middle. Andrew's camp, mostly nobles, political families with palace ties, and the particular category of people who believe that kings should be allowed to do whatever kings do, argued that the rejection had been appropriate. A teacher from the outer settlements was not Luna material. The moon goddess was a tradition, not a directive. Andrew had the kingdom's interests at heart. The other half of the kingdom, the majority of whom were ordinary wolves who had spent generations being told that their value was determined by their bloodline and their bank accounts, found something different in that photograph of Ashley with her chin up. They found themselves. Nora, who had the instincts of an investigative journalist trapped in the body of Ashley's best friend, was monitoring all of it from Ashley's kitchen table with 4 separate screens open simultaneously. The public comment sections are going insane. 60% in your favor and climbing. Someone started a petition demanding that Andrew issue a formal apology. It already has 40,000 signatures and it's been up for 4 hours. Ashley was at the counter making tea and trying not to look at her phone. I don't need a petition. I need breakfast. You need both. Also, Juan Lopez's publicist has issued a statement. Do you want to hear it? Read it. Nora cleared her throat dramatically and read in her most formal voice. Alpha Juan Lopez attended the Centennial Moon ceremony as a gesture of inter-kingdom respect. He witnessed events that he believes reflect poorly on the dignity of the Northern Wolf Kingdom's ceremonial traditions and its treatment of citizens. He has nothing further to add at this time. Ashley turned around with her tea. That's actually very well done. It says everything without saying anything actionable. He's been doing politics for 15 years. He knows how to throw a stone and look like he was just stretching. The knock at the door came an hour later. Not Juan. She had not expected Juan. A staff member from his team, carrying a handwritten note and a package wrapped in plain brown paper. The note read simply, Maria asked me to bring this to you. She says you will know what it means. Ashley opened the package. Inside was a copy of a community health report, one she had written 2 years ago for the Outer Settlement Children's Cooperative, the charity network she had quietly operated for 6 years. Feeding programs, basic healthcare visits, a small school library she had stocked book by book with her own teaching income. 340 children across 8 settlements. The report documented all of it. In the margin, in Maria's handwriting, the elderly community leader who had been Ashley's first volunteer, were 4 words. They already see you. Ashley sat down with the report in her lap and stayed still for a long time. She had kept the charity work private, partly out of humility and partly because she had never wanted it to become a bargaining chip in anyone else's political game. It was just work that needed doing and she had done it. She did not know yet that someone else had known about it for a very long time. Juan's first public act of kindness was not the motorcade entrance, as dramatic as that had been. It was the press conference he held that morning at the Kingdom's Civic Center. He arrived alone. No entourage, no advisors positioned for optics. Just himself, in a clean white shirt and dark coat, standing in front of a room full of press correspondents who had been hoping for fire. He gave them something colder and more precise. I want to address last night directly. What happened in the Royal Moon Arena was not simply a king exercising his right to refuse a mate bond. It was a king using a public ceremony to diminish a private citizen who had done nothing to warrant diminishment. That distinction matters. I am not here to tell this kingdom who its Luna should be. I am here to say that how you treat the people who cannot fight back tells the rest of the world everything about the kind of kingdom you are. The room was very quiet. A correspondent in the 3rd row raised her hand. Alpha Lopez. Were you and Ashley Stevens already acquainted before last night? Juan considered the question for a moment with the thoughtful patience of a man who understands the difference between an honest answer and a convenient one. I have been aware of Ashley Stevens' charitable work in the outer settlements for 2 years. I believe people who serve without recognition deserve recognition eventually. Last night was simply the first opportunity one had to say so publicly. In her apartment, watching the feed on Nora's phone, Ashley pressed her hand against her sternum. Not because she was overwhelmed, because something in her chest had just realized it was allowed to breathe again. Ashley Stevens had spent so much of the last 2 years looking toward the palace that she had almost stopped seeing what was directly in front of her. 12 days after the ceremony, she walked back into the community school on the eastern edge of the settlement districts and stood in the doorway of her classroom for a full minute before anyone noticed her. Then a 7-year-old named George, not the palace guard George, but a small boy named George who had once told Ashley that she was the best teacher he had because she explained things like he was smart, turned from the window and let out a sound of genuine joy. The rest of the class looked up. Ashley had not expected to cry. She did not cry at the arena, did not cry in the motorcade, did not cry in her apartment through all of Nora's righteous fury. She did not cry at the news reports or the public comments or the 40,000 signatures. She cried here in her classroom doorway, because these children were glad to see her, and it was clean and simple and required nothing complicated from her heart. She pulled herself together in approximately 4 seconds and walked to her desk. "All right, where did we leave off? You were going to teach us about the old territory maps. The ones from before the kingdom boundaries changed. Those maps are exactly what we are going to do today." Little George, settling back into his seat with the satisfaction of someone who had gotten something he wanted, looked up at her. "Miss Ashley? My dad says the Alpha King was stupid. Is that a bad word?" The classroom held its breath. Ashley's expression did not change. "We say made a poor decision in this classroom. My dad says the Alpha King made a very poor decision. Your dad is allowed to have opinions." Now the territory maps. After school, Ashley walked 3 blocks east to the outer settlement cooperative offices. A converted warehouse with cheerful painted walls and a chronic problem with the heating system, and sat down with Maria. Maria was 73 years old, small, iron-haired, and had the particular quality of someone who has watched enough of the world to be completely surprised by none of it. She poured Ashley a cup of tea and put a plate of biscuits between them and waited. Ashley said, slowly, "I've been thinking about expanding the healthcare program. The eastern settlements have been without a consistent medical visit schedule for 8 months. The Kingdom Health Board keeps deprioritizing it. They've been deprioritizing it for 3 years. You've been compensating by having our own volunteer medics drive out on weekends. I want to formalize it. Turn the weekend visits into a registered healthcare initiative. Get it funded properly so it can survive without depending on my personal income to run." Maria looked at her over her teacup. "That's been your goal for 2 years. Why now?" "Because I've been waiting for permission that was never coming. I spent 2 years being quiet about the work I was doing because I didn't want it to seem like I was asking for something in return. I wasn't asking for anything. But being quiet about it didn't protect me. It just made it easier for people to pretend I had nothing to offer." Maria set down her cup. "Your grandmother would have said the same thing in fewer words." "What words?" "Stop hiding your work like it's a shameful secret. It's a legacy." Ashley drove home through the settlement district in the early evening, the roads quiet and golden lit, and noticed for the first time in weeks that she felt like herself. Not a thinner version of herself. Herself. The version that existed before she started organizing her identity around what Andrew McLean might eventually see in her. Her phone buzzed, a number she had saved simply as JL. The message read, "I'm going to be in the Eastern District tomorrow for a meeting with settlement liaison officers. If you have a free hour in the afternoon, I'd like to hear about the cooperative." Ashley stared at the message for a moment. Then she typed, "I have the free hour. I'll bring the reports." She put the phone down, looked out the windshield at the settlement road stretching ahead of her in the lamplight. Something in her chest, carefully, quietly, began to rearrange itself. The afternoon meeting lasted 3 hours. Ashley had planned for one. She had brought the cooperative reports neatly organized in a folder: enrollment numbers, healthcare visit logs, library inventory, funding gaps, volunteer hours. 6 years of careful work reduced to paper, which somehow did not reduce it at all because the numbers were the kind that spoke for themselves. Juan Lopez read through the reports at the table in the cooperative's small conference room. One of the walls still had crayon drawings on it from the children's after-school program, and did not say anything for 10 minutes. Ashley had expected questions. She had prepared efficient, professional answers. What she had not prepared for was the expression on his face when he looked up from the enrollment page. Not admiration. Something more serious than admiration. Something that looked like a man recalculating the weight of a thing he thought he had already properly estimated. 340 children across 8 settlements. For 6 years. On a teacher's income. And the volunteer hours. I didn't do it alone. You built the infrastructure. You trained the volunteers. You wrote the funding applications that kept getting rejected and then found other ways to keep it running anyway. He set the report down. This is what a Luna does. Ashley met his eyes. I wasn't doing it to audition for anything. I was doing it because the children were there and the gap was there and I had the capacity to address it. I know. That's exactly my point. The report had stayed between them, but something else moved in the silence. Something that was not about cooperative funding or settlement healthcare anymore. Ashley became aware of the very specific quality of the attention Juan Lopez paid to things. He did not look at you to be seen looking. He looked because he was genuinely trying to understand what was in front of him. It was disorienting. She had not had that experience with anyone powerful before. Juan had a question. Why did you keep it private? I didn't want it to become something people used. A political talking point. Something the kingdom decided to have an opinion about before the work was finished. And now, Ashley looked at the crayon drawings on the wall. A yellow sun, purple dog. A stick figure with enormous eyes and the word teacher written below it in a child's careful handwriting. Now I think keeping it private was its own kind of self-protection. And I don't need that kind anymore. What neither of them knew in that conference room was that the cooperative story was about to get told without anyone's permission. Nora had been investigating. In the 9 days since the ceremony, Nora had been doing what Nora did when she was furious and focused and had a story to find. Following threads. The thread she had pulled on first was Richard, the senior royal advisor. Richard, who had stood beside Andrew on the platform. Richard, who had leaned in and murmured something in Andrew's ear moments after Juan's public statement in the arena. Richard, it turned out, had a financial relationship with two noble families who had been competing with Ashley's outer settlement territory for kingdom infrastructure funds. If Ashley became Luna, her charitable work would gain royal backing. That backing would shift resources toward the settlements. The noble families would lose political leverage. Richard had a material reason to want Ashley nowhere near the palace. Deborah's thread was different and worse. Deborah had spent 15 years cultivating influence in Andrew's inner circle by positioning herself as the only advisor who truly understood what the kingdom needed. She had fed him a steady diet of information carefully curated to reinforce his beliefs about status and alliance and bloodline. She had been the one to first describe Ashley to Andrew as a community worker, which was true, while omitting every other thing that was also true. She had been the one to schedule a series of political briefings about kingdom alliances in the weeks leading up to the centennial ceremony, briefings that happened to emphasize external threats and the need for strategic partnerships, briefings that happened to make a rejected mate bond look like strong, principled leadership. It was a manipulation so gradual and so patient that Andrew had never seen the architecture of it. He had only seen the conclusions it delivered. Nora brought all of it to Ashley in a single comprehensive file on a Thursday afternoon, spread across the kitchen table with a seriousness that was startlingly different from her usual energy. I need you to read all of this before I say anything, because I don't want you to have my reaction before you've had your own. Ashley read it. The reading took 40 minutes. Halfway through, her hand went to the moon pendant. By the end, she set the papers down and was quiet for a very long time. He didn't make that decision himself. He made it, but they built the road that led him there, brick by brick, over 15 years. That doesn't excuse it. No, it doesn't. But it explains why a man who is not entirely stupid could do something entirely stupid. Ashley stood up and walked to the window. Below, the settlement road carried its evening traffic. Families going home, children being called in from doorsteps, a group of young wolves laughing about something that had nothing to do with palace politics. We're going to need George. Nora looked up. George the palace guard. The honest one who had worked the royal dais for 7 years and had very recently, according to Nora's file, begun talking with unusual carelessness about things he had witnessed at close range, as though the weight of them had gotten too heavy to carry alone. I've already been in touch with him. Nora, I started pulling this thread 9 days ago. I was not going to leave it half-pulled. Ashley turned back from the window. Whatever was coming next, she was ready for it. The palace had a particular silence in the weeks after a mistake. Andrew McLean had grown up inside that silence. He knew its texture, The way staff moved with exaggerated efficiency when they wanted to avoid looking at you directly. The way reports arrived on his desk with the relevant lines already highlighted, as though the people bringing them were uncomfortable making him search for the difficult part. The way rooms went quiet when he entered and took slightly too long to warm up again. He had lived inside that silence before. After border confrontations. After failed diplomatic talks. After decisions that were correct but carried a cost he had to pay with his reputation. This silence was different. This one had a texture like guilt, which was a sensation he had very little practice with, and which he did not know how to organize into something useful. He had rejected her. He had stood above Ashley Stevens in the Royal Moon Arena with 10,000 wolves watching, and he had used a sacred ceremony to tell her that she was not enough. He told himself in the first days afterward that it had been the correct decision. Deborah had briefed him. Richard had laid out the political calculus. A community teacher from the eastern settlements could not anchor the alliances the kingdom needed. The moon goddess honored fate, but kings had to honor reality. He told himself these things with decreasing conviction. The photographs kept arriving. Not press photographs, those he could have filtered out. These came from his own intelligence reports. Ashley, 3 days after the ceremony, walking back into her classroom and being received like someone the children had been worried about and were enormously relieved to see. Ashley at the cooperative offices with Maria, writing something in a notebook with the focused energy of a person who has decided to accelerate rather than retreat. Ashley, and this was the one that lodged somewhere Andrew could not quite reach. Sitting across a table from Juan Lopez in a small conference room with children's drawings on the wall, talking about healthcare programs, while Juan Lopez looked at her with the expression of a man who was paying the most genuine kind of attention. Andrew called Richard in on the 7th day. "Tell me again what you know about her work with the settlements." Richard's response was measured. Community outreach, small-scale, informal. Some volunteer programs. Nothing that constituted a formal platform. "How many children?" Richard paused. Something brief and barely perceptible moved behind his eyes. "I don't have the specific numbers immediately available." "Find them." Richard found them. He had no choice. He brought the cooperative report to Andrew the following morning with the particular posture of a man delivering news he is not entirely sorry about because the news is exactly what the news is and there is nothing to be done. Andrew read it in his office. 340 children. 6 years. A teacher's income. Healthcare volunteers driving out on weekends. A library assembled book by book. Funding rejections absorbed and redirected, again and again, without complaint or public acknowledgement. He sat with the report for a long time. Then he called Deborah. He asked her, very calmly, when she had become aware of Ashley's cooperative work. Deborah's answer was smooth. She had been aware of it in general terms for some time. She had not considered it relevant to his political decisions. Why not? It was charitable work, Majesty, not a political platform. Juan Lopez considered it relevant enough to mention at his press conference within 12 hours of meeting her. Deborah was quiet for exactly 1 beat too long. Alpha Lopez was looking for a way to position himself favorably. He used her situation. It was strategic. And the settlement healthcare records that show coverage gaps your health board has been deprioritizing for 3 years while Richard's allied noble families received infrastructure funding? Was that also strategic? The silence in the room became the specific silence of something beginning to unravel. Andrew looked at the woman who had briefed him, counseled him, shaped his perceptions for 15 years, and he began, very slowly and with an unpleasant sensation in his chest that had no comfortable name, to see the architecture. He did not confront it fully yet, but the cracks in his composure had started, and everyone in the palace who paid attention could see them. George, the palace guard who had stood at the royal dais through 7 years of council meetings and private conversations, had been watching the cracks appear. He was a practical man, not political, not ambitious. He simply believed in what was right and wrong with the stubborn simplicity of someone who had never been corrupted by being close to power because he had always remembered that his job was to protect people, not to serve systems. He made a phone call to a number Nora had given him. The story broke on a Tuesday. It did not break on the palace's official information channels. It did not break on the royal news feeds that Richard had spent 15 years cultivating as friendly territory. It broke in the settlement press, a small, independent publication that covered the outer districts with the particular tenacity of people who had been overlooked long enough to stop waiting for attention from the main kingdom feeds. The headline was straightforward. Royal advisors suppressed charity data and manipulated settlement funding for years. Internal documents reveal pattern of interference. The byline belonged to a journalist named Lopez, not Juan. A different Lopez entirely, a young woman from the settlement districts whose family had been affected by the healthcare coverage gaps for years, and who had been building this story for 6 months before Nora's evidence arrived and gave it the final pieces it needed. The documents were meticulous. Nora had spent 2 weeks creating a file that was lawyer-proof, source-verified, and organized with a precision that most professional investigative journalists took years to develop. She had found the email trail between Richard and the Noble families. She had sourced the Internal Health Board communications showing deliberate deprioritization of Eastern settlement coverage. She had acquired, through George, the council meeting records that showed exactly when and how Ashley's name had been introduced into Andrew's circle, and how it had been systematically attached to limiting descriptors, community worker, outer district without formal alliance credentials, until the description became the definition. Most devastatingly, she had found a communication from 3 years ago, written by Deborah in the formal language of internal policy, recommending that the kingdom's future Luna candidates be evaluated against a criteria checklist that had been designed quietly, carefully, to ensure that someone like Ashley Stevens could never qualify regardless of what the moon goddess said. The kingdom responded the way kingdoms respond when they discover they have been managed rather than governed. Not quickly, then all at once. By the second day, the story had been picked up by every major territory news channel. By the third day, the 40,000 petition signatures had become 200,000. By the fourth day, settlement district community leaders, people like Maria, who had never once demanded public attention for their work, were giving quiet, dignified interviews that were more damning than any shouting could have been. Maria, sitting in a recorded interview with the settlement press journalist, said only this: Ashley Stevens fed children who would have gone hungry. She hired medical volunteers to see patients who would have gone untreated. She built a school library for children who had never owned a book. She did this for 6 years without asking for recognition or resources from the palace that was supposed to serve her community. And a king who should have seen what she was called her unworthy. That is what we are discussing. Inside the palace, Richard resigned before he was asked to. He delivered a tightly worded statement about the demands of public service and his desire to spend more time with his family, which was the language men in powerful positions use when the door is already closing behind them and they would like to choose the direction they face when it shuts. Deborah held on for 3 more days. Then the council. 6 senior members who had served longer than either Richard or Deborah, and who recognized a sinking ship's precise center of gravity, voted formally to remove her from her advisory position pending a full investigation. She left the palace on a gray morning without speaking to the press. Her expression, as the camera caught it, was not remorse. It was the expression of a woman who had played a very long game and was genuinely, icily surprised to have lost it. Andrew stood at the window of his private office the morning Deborah left and watched the car pull away. He had not slept well in 2 weeks. He was not a man who asked himself hard questions easily. He had been raised in an environment that rewarded certainty and treated self-examination as a kind of weakness to be managed privately and presented publicly as confidence. But he was also not, fundamentally, a dishonest man. He was a proud man, deeply structurally proud, and pride had made him susceptible to people who flattered the version of himself he most wanted to believe in. He looked at the cooperative report that had been on his desk for 11 days. 340 children. He had called her unworthy in front of 10,000 people. The knock at his office door was quiet. His new personal aide, young, careful, not yet shaped by the palace's internal politics, stepped in. "Your Majesty, there is something else." He set a second file on the desk, smaller than the cooperative report. An older document, genealogical with attached historical records. The records office found this while pulling settlement territory archives. We thought you should see it. Andrew opened it. He read it slowly. He read it again. 23 years ago, during the border conflict that had nearly cost his father's life, a woman from the Eastern Settlement District had provided shelter and medical care to the injured king before his guard could reach him. That woman had never identified herself publicly. His father had made one attempt to find her and failed. The woman's name was listed in the historical record of the community shelter that had taken the injured king in. Her name was Elena Stevens, Ashley's mother. Andrew sat very still at his desk for a long time. The woman who had saved his father's life had a daughter. The moon goddess had chosen that daughter for him. And he had stood above her in the royal moon arena and told the entire kingdom she was not enough. He pressed his palm flat against the document. He had not earned the right to call anyone unworthy. It happened in stages, the way opinion shifts always happen when the shift is real rather than manufactured. Unevenly, organically, through small moments that accumulate into something too heavy to ignore. The first stage was the petition. The second was Maria's interview. The third was a series of community events in the settlement districts that Ashley had organized months before the ceremony for entirely unrelated reasons. A cooperative fundraising fair, a school open house, a health clinic day, which now occurred in the context of everything the kingdom had learned and became something different than what they were originally meant to be. Not rallies. Not political statements. Just a woman who had survived a public humiliation doing what she had always done, which was show up for the people she had committed to showing up for. The kingdom watched. Specific moments caught, the way specific images always catch when they reflect something people already felt but had not seen confirmed. A photograph of Ashley at the open house, crouching down to a child's level to look at a drawing the child had made, laughing at something only the two of them could hear. A video of her at the health clinic day, organizing the volunteer schedule with Maria, her sleeves rolled up, her moon pendant catching the morning light. A clip from a settlement district elder who said, simply, in a voice interview, she never needed the palace. The palace needed her. Juan Lopez watched from a deliberate distance. He had not inserted himself into the news cycle after the initial press conference. He had not commented publicly on the scandal or Andrew or the petition. He attended his settlement liaison meetings. He responded to Ashley's messages. They had continued talking easily and regularly about the cooperative, about territory policy, about things that had nothing to do with the ceremony and everything to do with who they actually were underneath the political context. He was careful. Not because he was calculating, but because he understood that Ashley needed this time to be seen entirely on her own terms, not through the frame of his attention. He was also, if he was honest with himself, which he was, in the private way that people who have built their entire outer life on control allow themselves honesty only when no one is watching, profoundly, inconveniently drawn to her in a way that went far beyond admiration for her work. They had a conversation one evening in the cooperative office, late, after a long planning session for the healthcare initiative formalization. Everyone else had gone home. The building was quiet. Outside, the settlement district hummed with ordinary evening sounds. Ashley had her notebook open on the table but had stopped writing. She was looking at the crayon drawings on the wall, the same wall from their first meeting. The yellow sun, the purple dog, the stick figure teacher. Do you think he knew, Andrew, that his advisors were manipulating him? Juan considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. I think he is a man who wanted to believe he was making his own decisions, and his advisors were expert at providing him conclusions that felt like his own. That's different from knowing. Does that make it better? No. It makes him responsible for different things than I thought initially. He's responsible for the pride that made him willing to be managed. For choosing advisors who told him what he wanted to hear. For standing in that arena and making a decision that had someone else's fingerprints all over it without ever asking how that happened. Ashley looked at him. You've thought about this a lot. I've thought about you a lot. The two things tend to overlap. The honesty of it arrived quietly, without drama. Not a declaration, just a fact, stated in the even tone he used for everything. Ashley looked at the notebook in front of her. The window. The drawings on the wall. Juan. You don't have to say anything back. I'm not asking you for anything. I'm just not willing to be dishonest with you. She looked at him for a long time. He did not press. He waited, the way he always waited, without urgency, without pressure, with the specific patience of a man who had decided to let her arrive at her own conclusions on her own timeline. She reached across the table and put her hand over his. Just that. Nothing theatrical. Just contact and the warmth of it and the decision behind it. They stayed like that for a while in the quiet of the cooperative office, the settlement district humming outside, the crayon drawings watching from the wall. Andrew's request for a meeting arrived the following week. Not a summons, even he understood that he had lost whatever authority allowed summons. A request, worded carefully, asking if Ashley would be willing to meet with him privately. She showed it to Nora. Nora read it 3 times, looked up with an expression of elaborate neutrality, and said, I am going to give you my real opinion if you ask for it, and I am going to keep my mouth shut if you don't ask for it. Which do you want? Keep your mouth shut. I already know what I want to do. You're going to meet him. I'm going to meet him, because he deserves the chance to say what he needs to say, and I deserve the chance to hear it from him directly and decide for myself what it means. They met in a neutral space. Not the palace, not her apartment. A private room in the civic center. Andrew arrived before she did and was standing when she walked in, which she noticed. He looked different. Not smaller. He was still the same broad-shouldered, ice-eyed king the kingdom had always known. But there was something in his posture that had not been there in the arena. Something that looked very much like a man carrying the full weight of a decision he could not put down and was not trying to anymore. He spoke before she could. Your mother saved my father's life. I know that now. I should have known it years ago. There are many things I should have known years ago that I chose not to look for because looking would have complicated what I had already decided to believe. Ashley waited. I was wrong about you. Not in the way Deborah and Richard were wrong. They were wrong with deliberate intent and self-interest. I was wrong because I was proud enough to think my judgment was clean when it had been shaped by people who were feeding me the information they wanted me to have. That is not an excuse. It is an explanation. I know the difference. Ashley looked at him carefully. Andrew. Yes. What do you want from this meeting? He held her gaze. To tell you the truth. Not because it changes anything. But because you were owed the truth from the beginning and I took that from you. And the least I can do now is give you what I have left. Ashley was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded once, slowly. I appreciate that. And I want you to hear something from me in return. Tell me. I spent 2 years building a version of you in my mind that was better than the man who stood on that platform. That version of you would have chosen differently. But I understand now that the version I was loving was not entirely real. And that is not entirely your fault. I built him. What I'm saying is that the love I had was real, but it was partly aimed at something that didn't exist, and I've had to grieve both of those things at once. I'm done grieving. I'm not angry at you anymore. Andrew received that without flinching, which cost him something Ashley could see plainly. And Juan Lopez? She held his eyes. Is real. Andrew nodded. Once. He looked at the window for a moment. Then he said quietly, the way a man speaks when he is done performing. He chose well. He left before she did. The Royal Unity Ball was the second oldest tradition in the Northern Wolf Kingdom, hosted every year at the close of the ceremonial season. It was the event at which alliances were confirmed, partnerships announced, and the kingdom's political landscape was diplomatically refreshed for the coming year. This year, it was also the event at which every major noble family, territory leader, press correspondent, and ordinary wolf who had managed to get an invitation arrived with the particular energy of people who had been watching a long story building toward its conclusion and were not going to miss the final chapter. Ashley arrived with Juan. They had not discussed how to arrive. They had simply agreed on the time, and at that time Juan had appeared at her door in a white ceremonial coat with silver embroidery along the collar and cuffs. His black hair slightly damp, his expression the careful calm he always wore in public. And then his eyes had landed on her and the careful calm had briefly, privately become something warmer and completely unguarded. She was wearing silver again. not the gown from the ceremony. She had quietly donated that gown to Maria's cooperative for their annual fundraising auction, where it had sold for more money than any single item in the cooperative's history. This gown was different, deeper silver, the embroidery at the hem tracing the shapes of leaves and moons, the moon pendant at her throat. Juan had looked at her for a moment without speaking. "You look like someone who knows exactly who she is." "I finally do. Took a while." Some things that are worth knowing take a while. The ballroom was lit by hundreds of candles and the particular amber warmth of a space built for ceremony. The crowd was everything the Northern Kingdom's formal social world consisted of: beautiful, political, and fundamentally curious about what was going to happen. They watched Ashley and Juan enter, not with hostility. The scandal had done its work, and public sympathy had shifted with the thoroughness of a tide. They watched with something closer to anticipation, the kind that builds when a story people have been following is approaching the scene they have been most waiting for. Andrew was already there. He stood with the new advisors he had appointed in the weeks since the investigation. Younger, more honest, visibly uncomfortable with the old palace habits. He was dressed in his formal black, crown in place, every inch the kingdom needed him to be. But his ice-blue eyes found Ashley the moment she entered, and they stayed on her longer than they should have for a man at peace with his choices. He was not at peace. He had arrived here anyway. That was something. Nora, wearing an extraordinary emerald dress that suggested she had decided this evening called for maximum presence, appeared at Ashley's other side within approximately 30 seconds of their arrival. "I need you to know that I am having the best night of my life. And I have not even had champagne yet." "Nora, don't tell me to calm down. I have been calm for 6 weeks. Tonight I am present." Juan, who had been watching this exchange with the expression he wore when Nora was within his vicinity, a combination of genuine fondness and mild self-preservation, accepted a glass from a passing server and handed it to her. "Consider this an official endorsement of your evening." Nora accepted it with the dignity of someone receiving a knighthood. The formal portion of the evening began at the 9th hour. Territory presentations, alliance confirmations, the current political business of the kingdom conducted in the elegant shorthand of a formal ball. Andrew managed it with the steady competence that had always been his best quality, the part of his authority that had nothing to do with pride and everything to do with genuine capability. Ashley watched him work the room and felt, for the first time, something close to straightforward compassion for him. Not forgiveness exactly. Forgiveness was not the right category for this. But the recognition of a man who had made a serious mistake and was living in its consequences with more honesty than she had expected. Juan touched her wrist lightly. "Are you all right?" She looked up at him. "I'm very all right. I was just thinking that this time last year I would have been in this room hoping he'd notice me. Now I'm standing next to you and I feel more like myself than I ever did then." Juan looked at her for a moment. "I need to ask you something. In approximately 10 minutes, when the floor opens." "What kind of question?" "The important kind. The permanent kind." Ashley looked at him. His expression was the careful calm it always was in public. But underneath it, in the way she had learned to read him over the past weeks, in the slight tension at the edge of his jaw, the quality of focus in his eyes when he was most serious about something, she understood what he was about to do. Something enormous and warm moved through her chest. 10 minutes, she said and took his hand. The floor opened at the half-hour. The crowd moved toward the edges. Music began. Something stately and understated, the kind that asked nothing theatrical from the people in the room. Juan walked with Ashley to the center of the floor. He did not go down on one knee. That was not how the Wolf Kingdom formalized a public claiming. The tradition was older than that, more equal. He faced her. He took both her hands. And he spoke in a voice that was not loud but carried through the room with the absolute clarity of something meant to be heard by everyone. "Ashley Stevens. For 6 years you fed children without asking for recognition. You built something real with the hands and the income you had, and you did not wait for permission from anyone. I have watched you from a distance for 2 years with the particular frustration of a man who admired something he had no right to approach. Fate did not bring you to me. The moon goddess chose you for someone else. But I am choosing you for myself with my own eyes open and my own decision made, and I am asking you to stand beside me as my Luna. Not because of bloodline or alliance or what it means for my kingdom. Because you are the best person I have ever known, and I want to spend the rest of my life learning what that means. The ballroom held its breath. Ashley looked at the man in front of her. The thick black hair, the deep brown eyes, the scar through his eyebrow that he had never offered to explain and she had never pushed him to. The white coat, the hands holding hers, steady and certain and asking, not commanding. She looked, just once, briefly, across the room. Andrew was watching. His face was composed in the way faces are when composure is the only option remaining. He held her gaze for one honest moment. Then he nodded. Not permission, not blessing, just acknowledgement. I see you. You were always worth seeing. Ashley turned back to Juan. Yes. The room erupted. Not in the orchestrated way of political announcements. In the genuine, startled, cascading way of people who had been emotionally invested in something for 6 weeks and had just watched it resolve in the direction they had privately been hoping for. Nora made a sound that could be charitably described as a dignified celebration and uncharitably described as a noise that ricocheted off the vaulted ceiling and made 3 separate members of the catering staff look up in alarm. Juan reached into the inner pocket of his white coat. The Luna crown was small, not a throne crown, not a crown built for display. It was silver, delicate, set with 2 stones that caught the candlelight in alternating warmth and cool. He had had it made 3 weeks ago, quietly, by a craftsman from the settlement district. He had not told anyone, not even Ashley. He held it in both hands for a moment. Then he placed it on Ashley's head with the care of a man who understands that some things cannot be undone and has waited until he was certain he wanted to do them. Ashley Stevens stood in the center of the Royal Unity Ball with her chin up and her hazel eyes bright. Not with held-back tears this time, but with something that had not been there in the arena 6 weeks ago. Relief. An arrival. And the particular piece of a woman who has walked through something difficult without putting herself down for the people who needed her to, and has come out the other side exactly as she suspected she always was. Worthy. The weeks after the ball moved with the specific momentum of things that have been decided. Juan and Ashley announced the formal partnership between his territory and the Northern Kingdom's outer settlements. A cooperation agreement that redirected infrastructure funds toward the communities that had been deprioritized for years and established the Outer Settlement Healthcare Initiative as an officially recognized and permanently funded program. Maria, who had received the news sitting in her office at the cooperative, put her head in her hands for a moment and then straightened up and immediately started writing a list of everything that could finally get done. Nora took 3 days off. The first 3 consecutive days she had taken off in 6 years, and used them to sleep and eat and read things that had nothing to do with palace politics or investigative files. On the 4th day she came back better than new and immediately started asking Ashley how she felt about having a best friend with investigative skills at the level of a formal professional appointment. Ashley said she thought it was exactly right. Nora accepted this with a seriousness that suggested she had been building toward this conversation for approximately 6 weeks. The investigation into Deborah and Richard concluded 3 months after the scandal broke. Richard received a formal censure, his advisory credentials revoked, and was required to personally appear before the settlement councils he had deprioritized to answer questions from the community leaders his decisions had affected. The council sessions were not comfortable. He answered the questions anyway, which was at minimum the correct response even if it arrived too late. Deborah's consequences were more significant. The investigation found deliberate suppression of citizen data, manipulation of royal advisory records, and coordinated interference in ceremonial proceedings. She was removed permanently from palace credentials, barred from advisory roles within the kingdom, and required to make financial restitution to the cooperative programs that had been systematically defunded, while her allied noble families received preferential treatment. She accepted the ruling without public comment, which was the most honest thing she had done in 15 years. Ashley visited the ancient territory her grandmother's bloodline had left in trust. something her family had simply never pursued because the legal process was complicated and they were people who had always been more interested in the work in front of them than the land beneath their feet. A legal advocate from the settlement territories helped her formalize the inheritance claim. The territory was not vast, but it was real, and it meant that Ashley Stevens had never been without standing. She had simply not known where to look for it. She thought about that for a while. About all the ways women are taught that their value exists only in relation to what someone powerful is willing to recognize. About the things that go unclaimed because no one ever points at them and says that belongs to you, go get it. She wrote about it. Not an essay, a pamphlet for the cooperative's outreach program. Simple language, straight lines, things every age could understand. It was the most widely read document the cooperative had ever produced. Andrew McLean governed. That is perhaps the most complete thing that can be said about the months that followed for him. He governed with the particular seriousness of a man who has understood late, at cost, fully, what it means to be responsible for something larger than himself. He reformed the advisory selection process. He established a direct community liaison office that reported to him without going through the palace's filter system. He visited the settlement districts twice in the spring. He did not visit them for optics. He went because Maria had written him a letter, formal, brief, honest, that said the king could come and see the work his kingdom's citizens were doing if he was genuinely interested, and that she would tell him plainly what was needed without softening it for palace consumption. He went. He listened. It did not undo what he had done. Nothing could undo it. But it was the beginning of a king becoming the kind of king who might, years from now, look back at his worst decision and be able to say honestly that he had built something worth building with the rubble of it. Ashley and Juan were married on a clear evening in early summer, in the open air of the settlement district's central gathering ground. Not the Royal Moon Arena, not the palace ballroom. The same ground where Maria had organized the first cooperative fair 6 years ago, where the community gardens ran along the south wall, where the painted cooperative building stood with its cheerful walls and its chronic heating problem. The children from Ashley's school attended. Little George sat in the front row with the focused intensity of a person witnessing something important and knowing it. The purple dog and yellow sunchild was there too, wearing a bow tie that he had adjusted 17 times during the ceremony and was very proud of. Maria walked Ashley to the center of the gathering ground where Juan waited. She pressed Ashley's hand once before releasing her. Your grandmother would say you finally went and got what belonged to you. She would say it less gently than that. She absolutely would. Go. Juan stood in white, his expression the calm he always wore in public. And then, as Ashley reached him, entirely unguarded, just him, the scar through his eyebrow, the deep brown eyes, the hands reaching for hers with the certainty of a man who has been thinking about this moment for a very long time and is glad, simply and completely glad, that it arrived. They made no grand speeches. Juan had said what he needed to say at the Unity Ball. Ashley had never been interested in speeches. They said the old words together, the ones older than the kingdom, older than the palace, older than titles and bloodlines and the long human habit of deciding who deserves to stand beside whom. I see you. I choose you. I will keep choosing you. The community gathered around them erupted in the uncomplicated joy of people watching something good happen to someone who deserved it. Nora, standing 3 feet away, made the same sound she had made at the Unity Ball, which had now become something of a tradition. Ashley Stevens became queen of the Lopez territory and senior custodian of the Northern Settlement Cooperative on the same day. She wore her mother's moon pendant. That night, long after the community celebration had softened into smaller conversations and Nora had finally accepted that she needed to sit down, Ashley stood at the edge of the gathering ground with Juan beside her, looking out at the settlement district, the lit windows, the cooperative building, the community gardens in the summer dark. 6 years ago, I started feeding children because the gap was there, she said. And now you are queen. That's not why I did it. I know. That's why you're queen. She leaned into him. He put his arm around her. They stayed like that for a while, the settlement district quiet around them, the stars doing what stars do. Some lessons cost the people who learn them everything. Andrew McLean would spend years understanding the specific weight of choosing status over character, not as a punishment imposed from outside, but as the natural consequence of being a man who was shown something true and chose something comfortable instead. Some lessons arrive as gifts. Ashley Stevens learned that she had been enough all along. Not because someone finally told her, because she had always been doing the work of someone who was, and the work did not lie. And some lessons are the kind that are best understood not by the person who receives them, but by the people watching, the kingdom, the children in classrooms, the families in settlement districts, every person who has ever been told they were too ordinary to matter. The lesson the Northern Kingdom learned that year was simple. The right people do not make you prove your worth. They recognize it. And if they don't recognize it in time, someone who does will find their way to you. A note before you go. Every kingdom has its crowns, but not every crown lands on the right head on the first try. And that's the point. Ashley's story was never really about Andrew's rejection. It was about what she built while she was waiting for someone to see her, and what happened when she stopped waiting and started seeing herself. The question isn't whether Andrew deserved forgiveness. The question is whether you have ever stood in that arena, wherever your arena is, and kept your chin up when everything in you wanted to fold. If you have, you already know what Ashley knows. You don't need someone else's approval to begin. You just need to begin. Subscribe to see how this unfolds, and comment where you're watching from. I will love to say hello to you, just to know how far our story is going. Because every view is a real person on the other side of a screen, and every comment tells me you were here, and that matters more than you know. There is a particular kind of loss that comes not from being taken from, but from being overlooked, and a particular kind of victory that comes not from defeating someone, but from becoming so undeniably yourself that the question of whether you were ever worthy stops making sense. Ashley's story was that kind of victory. Some people will never recognize what they had until it belongs to someone else. Some people will spend years building the road to their own regret, one careful choice at a time. And some people, the ones who matter, will look at what you have quietly built and say, "This is what I was looking for." Be the person building. The recognition comes. The right love won't ask you to be less than you are. It will arrive asking how it can help you become more. Until next time, be well, be whole, and remember, the people who matter will not make you prove your worth. They will simply see it, and spend the rest of their lives being grateful they did.